Welcome back to Bring Back Gold. You know, here, we're always on the hunt for those moments, those systems, those creations that just stand out. Real high points in quality and craftsmanship.
Yeah, the genuine golden ages. And today we're diving into something truly special, a masterclass in societal change, really. We're looking at New Zealand, 1893.
The golden age of democratic participation, as we're calling it. Okay, let's set the scene. 19th of September, 1893. Think about it. Britain, America, huge powers, still deeply embroiled in struggle.
Exactly. Women were fighting, sometimes violently, just to be recognized politically. Suffrage felt radical, almost dangerous to the establishment.
It really did. The prevailing political thought just excluded half the population by design, and then suddenly, down in the South Pacific, this relatively small nation does something extraordinary.
New Zealand, the first self-governing country anywhere to grant all women the vote. Not just property owners, not just certain groups, all women.
It was a shockwave, really. Stunned the international community. That, right there, is what Bring Back Gold is all about. Finding those moments where quality organizing, brilliant strategy, yield something truly lasting. A golden moment for democracy itself.
And that's our mission today. We want to get into the sources, unpack the sheer dedication, the intricate planning, the strategic thinking that made this happen, the quality of the campaign.
And not just look back, right?
Yeah.
We want to see what that legacy means now, 132 years on, here in 2025.
Definitely. Because the ripples from 1893 are still felt. It wasn't just a law change. It told the world, look, this works. Democracy gets stronger.
And you can see it today. New Zealand's still seen as a leader in gender equality. You mentioned the pay gap data before we started.
Yeah, it's striking. Currently down to 5.2%. That's the lowest it's been since they even started keeping records back in '98.
Wow.
It really shows that the foundation they laid back then, that golden age quality, it's still delivering. It's an ongoing process.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Why New Zealand? Why was this place seemingly on the edge of the world, the first? What made it so receptive?
Well, you have to understand the unique context. People back then, observers from overseas, they actually called New Zealand the social laboratory of the world.
The social laboratory. I like that. It implies experimentation, trying things out.
Exactly. It was seen as this place where you could test progressive ideas, concepts that would take decades longer to gain traction in, say, Europe or North America.
So what created that laboratory environment? What was different?
Several things, really. First, its class structure was, comparatively speaking, quite fluid. You didn't have the centuries of baked-in aristocracy, the rigid hierarchies you saw in Britain.
Less baggage, basically.
Less baggage, fewer deeply entrenched conservative institutions fighting to maintain the status quo. Class existed, for sure, but it wasn't this monolithic barrier to change.
Makes sense. And that ties into the pioneering spirit, I guess.
Absolutely. When you're fundamentally building a society, there tends to be more openness to new ways of doing things. Problem solving is part of the culture. The political system itself was newer, less calcified.
So a willingness to innovate, to try things out.
And into this fertile ground steps the temperance movement.
Right, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU. It seems almost paradoxical, doesn't it? A movement focused on banning alcohol becoming the engine for women's voting rights.
It's a masterclass in strategic alignment, though. The movement came over from America, gained momentum in the 1870s, and the WCTU was officially set up in '85 after Mary Leavitt's visit.
Okay.
And the key thing, it provided a socially acceptable way for women to organize politically. Suddenly, it wasn't just radical women demanding rights, it was respectable women organizing for moral good.
The framing. That motto, for God, home, and humanity. That's clever.
Incredibly clever. It connected the traditional role of women protectors of the family, the home, directly to the need for political power.
So the argument wasn't just abstract rights, it was practical.
Exactly, it was. We need the vote to protect our families from the evils of alcohol, from gambling, from the things tearing society apart. It framed suffrage as an extension of women's moral duty.
Which must have disarmed a lot of the initial conservative criticism, the idea that women were abandoning their proper sphere.
Completely. It gave them a pathway into politics that was defensible within the existing social norms. It was genius, really.
But did that narrow focus on temperance risk alienating women who weren't necessarily prohibitionists but still wanted the vote? How did they manage that?
That's a really important question. And this is where the leadership, particularly Kate Sheppard's leadership, comes in. They absolutely use the WCTU as the engine, the network, the meeting places. The volunteers were largely driven by it.
Okay, the organizational muscle.
Right. But Sheppard was smart enough to broaden the message as the campaign grew. She didn't just keep banging the drum about liquor.
So she evolved the argument.
Precisely. Her pamphlets, her speeches, they started moving towards fundamental rights. Yes, temperance was the hook, the organizing principle, but the core argument increasingly became about citizenship, about the injustice of excluding women.
Using the moral high ground gained from temperance to push for the wider goal of equality.
That's the quality of leadership we're talking about. Adapting the message, using the tools available, but always aiming for that bigger prize.
And that leadership really centers on Kate Sheppard. The sources paint her as this incredibly capable figure, born in Liverpool, moved to New Zealand. She seems tailor-made for this moment.
She really does. Formidable intellect, apparently a very gifted speaker and writer, and just this unwavering sense of justice. But crucially, she wasn't just passionate. She was strategic, a systems thinker.
You can see that in her role from 1887.
Right?
National Superintendent of Franchise and Legislation for the WCTU. That title itself sounds serious, methodical.
It signals a shift, doesn't it, from general advocacy to focused political action. And she essentially transformed the WCTU. It wasn't just about temperance anymore. It became this sophisticated, multi-pronged political machine under her direction.
Multi-pronged how? What were the main elements of her approach?
Well, she tackled it from all angles. First, there was the intellectual persuasion, making the logical moral case for suffrage.
Like those pamphlets you mentioned.
Yeah.
10 reasons why the women of New Zealand should vote.
Exactly. And the brilliance of that pamphlet wasn't just passion, it was logic. It systematically dismantled the arguments against suffrage. She pointed out the absurdity of women paying taxes, but having no say in how those taxes were spent. A classic democratic argument, really.
Turning the core principles of their own system against the exclusion.
Precisely. But the argument that really hit home, the one that caused the most discomfort, was pointing out who women were legally classified alongside.
Ah, yes, the aliens, lunatics, and criminals line.
That was devastatingly effective. It forced people, especially men, politicians, to confront the reality. Were their wives, mothers, daughters truly in the same category as convicts and the insane? It created a moral dissonance that was hard to ignore.
A powerful, almost shaming tactic, but grounded in legal reality.
Absolutely. So you have this strong intellectual foundation. But Sheppard knew that wasn't enough on its own. You needed mass mobilization.
Which, in 1880s New Zealand, must have been a huge logistical challenge. We're talking about a spread out population, difficult travel.
Incredible challenges. Communication was slow mail. Telegrams, maybe. She was organizing public meetings all over the country, coordinating volunteers, constantly writing letters to politicians.
And traveling herself, right? The sources mention her going everywhere.
Everywhere. By foot, on horseback, trains where they existed, coastal steamers. She went to the cities, the small towns, the remote farming communities, even gold rush settlements. She was physically building the network, person by person, community by community.
That's sheer dedication, relying on those local WCTU chapters and church groups.
That was the key. A decentralized network, but unified by her strategic direction, particularly focused on collecting petition signatures. She understood the power of demonstrating overwhelming public support.
So it's that classic combination. The sharp intellectual case and the undeniable force of popular demand. You need both.
You absolutely need both. She aimed to corner Parliament intellectually while simultaneously overwhelming them politically. It's a blueprint for how you achieve major social change.
And that leads us straight to the petitioning effort. You called it the campaign's masterpiece, and the scale is just staggering.
It really is. This wasn't just collecting a few names. It was about demonstrating an undeniable mandate from the people. And the key was persistence.
They didn't just try once.
No, they built pressure year on year. In 1891, they presented a petition with over 9,000 signatures. Parliament basically said, interesting, but not enough.
So they went back out.
They went back out. In 1892, they came back with nearly 20,000 signatures. Still, Parliament stalled. The message from the suffragists was clear. We're not going away. We're only getting stronger.
Which set the stage for 1893, the final massive push.
And the numbers are just mind-blowing for the time, almost 32,000 signatures. You have to remember New Zealand's population back then, this represented nearly a quarter of the entire adult European female population.
A quarter?
Yeah.
That's not a fringe movement. That's mainstream demand.
Exactly. It completely undercut any argument that this was just a few noisy activists in the cities. This was a national movement.
And the way they presented that final petition, that was pure political theater, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely deliberate. We're talking about the monster petition. Hundreds of individual sheets, over 540 of them glued together end to end.
Creating this massive scroll. How long was it?
When they unfurled it, it stretched over 270 meters. That's almost 3 rugby fields.
Wow. Just imagine that.
Imagine carrying that into Parliament. The sources say it took several people. Sir John Hall, a supportive MP, presented it, and apparently it dramatically rolled out across the floor of the House of Representatives.
The visual impact must have been immense. It's not just numbers on paper anymore. It's a physical manifestation of popular will.
It completely dominated the space. You couldn't ignore it. You couldn't dismiss it. It was right there, this tangible proof of demand.
And behind that scroll were the volunteers, those 600 women collecting names. The quality of that grassroots organization is remarkable, too.
Phenomenal detail and dedication. They worked out of homes, church halls, meticulously collecting names. And crucially, they made sure to get signatures from everywhere. Remote farms, small Maori communities, though Maori women's voting rights had complexities related to communal land ownership, not just Wellington or Auckland.
So a truly broad-based effort.
Intentionally so. It proved this wasn't just an urban middle-class concern, it was nationwide.
Okay, so the petition lands like a bombshell. The pressure is enormous. And then comes this other layer of symbolic politics, the Battle of the Camellias.
Yes. This shows just how politically savvy they were becoming. It wasn't just about brute force numbers, it was about sophisticated messaging. After the bill passed its crucial stage in the House of Representatives on September 12th.
The elected house, right.
Correct. Wellington suffragists did something quite elegant. They presented 20 white camellias, tied with white ribbon, to the 20 MPs who had voted in favor.
Why white camellias specifically?
It was loaded with meaning. White was the color associated with the WCTU representing purity, moral purpose. And the camellia itself, in the popular language of flowers of the time, symbolized things like perseverance, love, devotion.
So a public thank you, marking their allies clearly and beautifully.
Exactly. A very visible, very symbolic gesture of gratitude and alignment.
And the opposition felt they had to respond in kind.
They did. Just 3 days later, as the debate moved to the Legislative Council, the appointed upper house anti-suffrage women showed up and presented red camellias to their supporters.
Red versus white. A clear visual fight.
It perfectly symbolized the divide. Purity versus, well, whatever the anti-suffragists thought red meant, maybe tradition, maybe passion against change. But it visually marked the battle lines.
And ultimately, the white camellia won out. It became the enduring symbol.
It did. It's still used today in New Zealand on things like parliamentary brooches and awards related to suffrage. It speaks volumes about winning not just the vote, but the symbolic moral high ground, too. The quality of their symbolism was just as strong as their organization.
Okay, so massive public mandate via the petition, powerful symbolism with the camellias. But it still wasn't a done deal, was it? The final hurdle was the Legislative Council.
Right, the appointed upper house. And the main opponent lurking there, pulling strings behind the scenes, was the premier himself, Richard Seddon. King Dick, they called him.
And his opposition wasn't really about the principle of women voting, was it? It was pure politics.
Pure political calculation. He was terrified that women voters would overwhelmingly back prohibition, the temperance movement's ultimate goal.
Which would hit his political base hard.
Exactly. Publicans, breweries, and many working-class men who enjoyed a drink were core parts of his support. He saw women's suffrage as a direct threat to his power.
So he couldn't openly oppose it because the public mood, thanks to Sheppard's campaign, were shifting.
Right, that would look bad. So he decided to try and kill it quietly in the Legislative Council, where he had more influence because he recommended the appointments to the governor.
The classic backroom deal strategy.
Pretty much. His plan was to instruct some of his allies in the council to vote against the bill, ensuring it failed by just 1 or 2 votes. That way, he could look neutral, maybe even sympathetic, while secretly ensuring its defeat.
But this plan backfired. How?
It backfired spectacularly because he pushed too hard. The sources suggest his lobbying went beyond gentle persuasion. He was applying intense pressure, making it feel like a direct order to some counselors.
And that offended their sense of independence.
Deeply. Especially to counselors who were actually opposed to the suffrage bill itself, William Reynolds and Edward Cephas John Stevens. They weren't pro-suffrage.
So why did they switch?
Out of pure principle, protesting Seddon's tactics, they were insulted by his heavy-handed attempt to manipulate their vote, to treat them like puppets. So in protest against Seddon's methods, they changed their votes and voted for the bill.
Wow. So the bill passed because opponents were more disgusted by the premier's dirty tricks than they were opposed to women voting.
That's exactly what happened. The bill passed by the slimmest of margins, 20 votes to 18. Those two protest votes made all the difference.
That is an incredible historical irony. It speaks volumes, again, about the quality of the suffragist campaign, doesn't it? They'd raised the moral stakes so high that even opponents wouldn't stoop to obviously corrupt tactics to defeat it.
Precisely. Seddon's attempt at manipulation actually highlighted the perceived integrity of the suffrage movement. His tactics looked shabby in comparison.
Okay, so it passes the Legislative Council by a whisker. Surely that's it.
Not quite. One last desperate attempt by the opposition. 18 of the losing legislative councillors immediately fired off a petition to the governor, Lord Glasgow.
Asking him to do what?
Asking him to refuse to give royal assent. Essentially, asking the Queen's representative to veto the decision of the New Zealand Parliament.
A huge constitutional step. Basically asking him to overrule the democratic process.
A massive step. It could have sparked a real crisis. But Governor Glasgow held his ground. He recognized the overwhelming popular support shown by the petition. He respected the process the bill had gone through Parliament.
Even with the drama.
Even with the drama. And on the 19th of September, 1893, he signed the Electoral Act into law. It was official. New Zealand had done it.
So the law passes. The Golden Age officially kicks off. What happens next? Does the world notice immediately?
Instantly. News travels fast, even then. Telegrams flooded into New Zealand congratulating them. But the biggest impact wasn't just applause, it was strategic.
How so?
Suddenly, suffrage movements in Britain, the U.S., Canada, everywhere had irrefutable proof. Opponents could no longer just say, oh, it'll cause chaos, society will collapse if women vote.
Because New Zealand had just shown it wouldn't.
Exactly. The social laboratory had run the experiment, and the sky hadn't fallen in. Democracy seemed, if anything, strengthened. It pulled the rug out from under one of the main anti-suffrage arguments.
New Zealand became the living example, the blueprint.
Absolutely. And Kate Sheppard herself became something of an international figure. She traveled, she shared the strategies, especially the power of those massive, persistent petitions.
So the quality of their method, their organization, was directly transferable.
Very much so. You see other places adopting similar tactics. South Australia followed relatively quickly in 1894, actually, not 1902 for the state level. Then the Commonwealth of Australia in 1902, Finland in 1906, Norway in 1913.
The dominoes start to fall.
They do. And particularly after World War I, the pace picks up dramatically. New Zealand had shown that extending democracy wasn't a threat. It was arguably part of becoming a modern, stable nation.
Okay, let's fast forward, bringing it to today, 2025. How does this 1893 victory resonate now? It's not just a historical footnote, is it?
Not at all. It's actively celebrated and consciously connected to the present. Suffrage Day, September 19th, is a big deal. You see things like that original monster petition being carefully preserved and sometimes displayed a tangible link back to the struggle.
And communities getting involved.
Yeah, using the suffrage colors, purple, white, and green. Lighting up landmarks like bridges in purple. It keeps that visual heritage alive, reminds people of the foundation.
And politically. Does the government acknowledge this legacy?
Consistently. You hear ministers, like the current Minister for Women, Nicola Grigg, talk about it. They acknowledge the leadership role New Zealand played, but also frame it as an ongoing journey. There's pride, but also a recognition that true equality, as she put it, still requires work.
It sounds like a mature approach, building on the past, not just resting on it.
It does, and you see it in policy efforts. We mentioned the pay gap falling to 5.2%. That's a concrete outcome.
Are there other areas where you see that 1893 legacy playing out?
Definitely in representation. New Zealand has put a real focus on getting women onto public sector boards, for instance. Setting targets, often hitting close to 50-50 representation in leadership roles across government agencies. That feels like a direct continuation of the push for women's voices in decision-making that started in 1893.
And having had multiple female prime ministers, like Jacinda Ardern becoming such a prominent global figure, That also feels connected, doesn't it?
It absolutely connects back. It shows that the political space opened up in 1893 has allowed women to rise to the very highest levels of leadership and to be seen as leaders on the world stage.
It all seems rooted in that fundamental moral argument Sheppard made so effectively that exclusion itself is the injustice.
That's the core principle, isn't it? That classifying women with juveniles, lunatics, and criminals was morally wrong. That basic argument for inherent dignity and rights continues to be relevant, not just for gender equality, but for other liberation movements too. The quality of that initial moral framework gives it lasting power.
It's interesting, too, how modern celebrations often highlight the contributions of diverse groups, like Maori women, reflecting that broad coalition needed back in 1893.
Yeah, acknowledging that it wasn't just one group, but a wider movement. The legacy is complex, but the core achievement, spearheaded by Sheppard and the WCTU's incredible organization, remains this shining example. The white camellia, you could say, is still blooming. Hashtag outro. So when we look back at New Zealand in 1893 through our Bring Back Gold lens, what we see is that these golden ages, these moments of exceptional progress, they don't just happen by accident.
Now, they're built with incredible organization, strategic thinking, sheer persistence, and this powerful moral clarity that leaders like Kate Sheppard embodied.
They literally crafted a blueprint for change. They showed the world how you combine that rigorous intellectual argument for why change is needed.
With the undeniable power of mass mobilization,
Yeah.
getting thousands of people involved and making their voices impossible to ignore. Working within the system but fundamentally challenging its assumptions.
And maybe the most inspiring thing is that 1893 wasn't the end point. It was the start. New Zealand's continued progress, its ongoing commitment, shows that the gold they unearthed back then is still shaping a better future.
It really does. So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something for you, our listener, to think about. Sheppard and her allies fundamentally challenged the injustice of classifying women alongside those deemed unfit for citizenship. They used brilliant organization and moral force to change that.
The question for us today is, what modern forms of exclusion, what inequalities that we currently accept could be overturned if we applied that same level of strategic skill, that same persistent organizing, and that same unwavering moral clarity?
Where could the next global golden age of human rights be sparked?
Definitely something to ponder.
We hope this look back at New Zealand's suffrage victory has given you some inspiration from a true golden age. Thanks for joining us on Bring Back Gold.